I'm Andy Rudalevige from Bowdoin College. This paper will be a complement, not a substitute, I think, for Kenny's work, and indeed a complement to a lot of the things that have been presented already. Looking at an iteration of a project that some of you have seen before, various pieces that have come out over time, and so I'm going to focus on a little bit different piece than I have before. But certainly, to get there, I need to go over some of the same ground, so apologies to those of you who've heard this. But again, this is coming from a similar place to some of the research that's already been presented. The idea that this resurgence in work on unilateral presidential directives, both in theory, especially coming out of rational choice or game theory approaches to presidential behavior, and of course in real life, right? The rise, or the re-rise, if you will, of the imperial presidency under George W. Bush and now Barack Obama with regards to their reliance on the pen and the phone over time. We can't wait, after all. Again, most of this is about outputs. There's a big chunk of this literature that really is about when orders are issued and under what conditions, and a lot of that, again, will depend on external circumstance by the legislature, by the judiciary, and the formulation process of those orders tends to be something of a black box. So I want to replace the black box with the birds and the bees, right? I want them to be born in a loving and natural way through the executive branch process. And to talk about that, really the motivation for this is that while, again, the literature on the president's unilateral action has tended to be driven by assumptions that there are no collective action problems, for example, within the executive branch. The president has perfect information, and that there is effectively a unitary executive branch, or at least a unified executive branch. And we can push on this a little, but of course a lot of the public administration literature, maybe all of it, tends to take the opposite tack, right? That, as William Safire, Richard Nixon's speechwriter back in the 70s put it, the so-called chief executive can tug and haul all day and never rip up the bureaucracy. James Q. Wilson, Morton Halperin, Graham Allison, a lot of classics of public administration. Much more recently, Steve Brill, if you've read his book about the Affordable Care Act and the implementation of Obamacare, makes a lot of the same points in that case study. So I want to look at whether there's something to that, right? How are presidents formulating executive orders, and what does that tell us about intra-executive bargaining, right? What do they have to do to get what they want? So the data here come from the list of executive orders. I have a sample by administration. I can talk more about this if you'd like, which at the moment stands at 539 executive orders, and also 150 plus unissued orders that have been discovered along the way. Those are not sampled. They're not, I don't think, in any particular way random. Maybe they are, I can't tell. But in any case, those are a nice complement to the issued set, and I'm hoping over time will be even more helpful in letting us know what the order process is like. So the sources are largely archival, right? And I'll talk a little more about this, but the OMB is the main source. They are in charge of keeping the executive order files. Those are supplemented with records that are held at the Washington National Records Center, the Eisenhower Library, again, a number of archival holdings. And that's sort of what they look like in their natural state. Those of you who've done archival research will recognize some form of those boxes. Sometimes they come in nice small boxes. These ones, not so small. And so this is what I'm trying to analyze. What's in there? Well, a couple things. One, if we think about collective action problems, we think about transaction costs. And James Q. Wilson terms those as the costs of planning, negotiating, directing, and evaluating the activities necessary to produce something, in this case, an executive order. Oliver Williamson has written quite extensively about this, and it really does come out of the theory of the firm, which Kenny at least alluded to in terms of the make or buy question, right? Are you going to make something in-house, or are you going to outsource it? As early as the 1930s, and then recodified sort of for keeps in 1962 by President Kennedy with Executive Order 11030, is a process that assumes, and this by now is perhaps not a surprise, but I think originally struck folks this way, assumes that the orders are actually going to come from somewhere else. They're not going to be fresh from the head of the president. When the Bureau of the Budget, now OMB, proposes to President Kennedy this revision of the executive order, they explicitly say that they're not getting enough information from the agency. We need to obtain from the agencies adequate information in support of the proposed order. Such information has frequently been meager. As importantly, a proposed order, the General Counsel tells Ted Sorensen, Kennedy's counsel, will be handled more expeditiously and with greater protection to the president than one that is processed outside these channels. And so we have already the implication that the president needs to be protected from his own executive branch, which is notable surely if you have a pure unitary executive. This is going to be a little hard to read perhaps, but one of my favorite findings from the archives is in fact the Postit note stuck on this memo. Again, this is a memo from H.R. Haldeman, President Nixon's chief of staff, telling people what the deal is. He has gotten a memo from actually the same guy, the General Counsel of the Bureau of the Budget, telling H.R. Haldeman in early January 1969, with the new administration coming in, here's how we do it. Here's how the process works. And Haldeman has written a Post-it note to remind himself, right? Originator to the budget, the Attorney General, to the Counsel, to Hopkins, who's the White House Staff Secretary, and then to the President. But again, originator is going to go to the budget, and the budget is going to send it out to all the departments and agencies that might be interested, right? This is a clearance process that the Bureau of the Budget, again now OMB, has done for legislation forever. It's done it for congressional testimony. It's done it since the 1980s for regulations. And again, it does it for executive orders. So this particular order sent out in the Carter administration goes to Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, HEW, HED, Interior, Justice, Labor, State, Transportation, and Treasury. And again, depending on the order, it will go to a different subset of groups and agencies that OMB thinks will be interested. Increasingly in recent years, it goes to a whole number of EOP agencies as well, right? Sub-offices within the broader EOP, and that has its own implications, which I have not yet fully explored, but I think are possibly intriguing. So, as I look at the orders, one of the things I'm interested in, of course, is where they're created. And borrowing from older work, looking at the centralization of legislative proposals, I applied a similar framework to executive orders, such that a code of zero means that the order was produced pretty much entirely in the department or agency. A 3 is produced within the executive office of the president. As I say, that's a little bit artificial because that is not a singular entity, at least at this point in the history. But nonetheless, we'll roll with that for the moment. And then, of course, a 1 and a 2 are somewhere in between. You can see that about 45% of orders are going to come from the agencies, another 15% or so predominantly or preponderantly from the agencies. So about 60 to 40 can be balanced out in that way. By the way, just to think about unissued orders, they look pretty similar, which has actually made me happy, in that they are, interestingly, if anything, a little more decentralized, but not anything dramatic. If you want to look at it by president, you can see that it bounces around quite a bit. The linear trend is upward, but not dramatically so. And so, again, it doesn't appear that there's a massive trend of presidents doing more things in-house, even as their EOP has grown. Though, the mean does get higher as you get to Nixon and sort of the start of the administrative presidency. On the other hand, Carter, generally thought of as an administrative loser, is the highest, actually, mean-wise, and that's largely because of the large number of reorganization proposals that his OMB was asked to, well, actually the president's reorganization project, which was separate from OMB, but was asked to put forward. Now, in other work, I've talked a lot about why centralization might occur, what are the causes of it. I'm going to skip over that for today's purposes because I'm interested in thinking about the agencies themselves, and this is sort of where this project is moving, I hope. So for example, do different agencies get different levels of, well, this is really discretion in a sense. How much authority do they get? This is an incomplete table in that there are a number of orders which are currently coded as OMB as the lead agency. That's a little bit artificial. OMB drafted them, but that doesn't mean that the agency was uninvolved, or in some cases that OMB was not in fact overriding what the agency wanted. So my guess is that when that is incorporated into the data, these means will actually go up somewhat. This is sort of skewed low towards the decentralization end. Nonetheless, there's some interesting variants. Something like the National Mediation Board, which puts out extraordinarily similar executive orders every time there's a labor dispute, just in case the president needs to have arbitration for it. As you can see, basically gets no interference at all, right? Their mean is basically a 0. Every once in a while, somebody weighs in. Sort of moving up, you see that the Justice Department actually winds up with the most sort of interfered with, if you will, set of orders, which makes some sense if you think about the kind of controversy that justice orders could include. It should be noted these are all the agencies currently that have at least 10 orders in the sample. Another way we can think about transaction costs is how long does it take to issue an order? Right? Does it come out right away? Does it take days? In fact, does it take years? The largest date to the time to issuance